Welcome to episode 416 of Salcedo Paranormal, and tonight I'm continuing my review of selected stories from Stephen King's anthology Skeleton Crew. As always, you can find all episodes of the show, along with links to social media and other ways to contact me at the podcast page, and that is salcedoparanormal.podbean.com. That's SALSIDO Paranormal.podbean.com. Always happy to hear from you all, whether you have comments or questions or topic suggestions, or stories of paranormal experiences, whether they're your own or from others that you trust. Happy to either read those or have you join me on the show to talk about them. Thank you all for listening, whether you make it here onto Discord for the live streams, or you listen to the shows on the podcast or YouTube feeds, or if you listen to the replays of the show, which you can hear every night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern on the Trouble Minds Radio Network, KUAP, Digital Broadcasting. I want to thank Michael Strange, host of Trouble Minds Radio, and Liam Martin, host of the Exiled Minds podcast, for producing the shows, putting in the music that you hear at the beginning and the end of every show when you listen on the radio station. If you'd like to support the show, there are some different ways to do that. First, you can always share the show, and then also rate and review the show on whatever podcast platform you use. Also, I have written some paranormal fiction and nonfiction books that you can check out on Amazon. And then, if you'd like to donate directly to the show to help cover expenses in equipment, research material, and also to help offset expenses that I will have when going to this year's Mid-Michigan Paracon in November. There are a couple different ways to do that. I have PayPal, Venmo, and Patreon links set up for that. Help is never expected, but always appreciated. And looking to start getting all that planned soon, so I'm really excited about going to that event. That'll be my first time ever going to any kind of Paracon, so I think that covers everything. So this is the second part in this series on some of these stories from Skeleton Crew, and definitely recommend the book. There's a lot of stories in there that I'm not getting to because they are either just suspense without any paranormal, or psychological horror thriller, again, without much paranormal, if any at all. So I'm going to skip those and leave those to you all to check out on your own. But it is a very good book. Definitely recommend it. So the first story I want to get to tonight is called Word Processor of the Gods. And so this story is about a writer, middle-aged writer, Richard Hagstrom, who is basically just getting by on his writing and everything, and I believe even teaching and things. So, but he is basically very unhappy with his current life. He feels his wife is basically tyrannical, doesn't really care for him, and then that his son is also teenage son is also very disrespectful, and so he just doesn't like life in general. And meanwhile, his brother, who always basically bullied him and made life difficult, years ago got married and had a son, and it's a strange case where Richard secretly always liked his brother's wife and son more than his own. But there is, in the beginning of the story, there's a car accident, where Richard's brother, Roger, ends up crashing the family's vehicle, due to drunk driving, unfortunately, and the whole family ends up dying in the accident. And so the family's effects are divided up, and there is this one item which appears to be a word processor that, if I'm not mistaken, it was actually meant for Richard. And so he receives this word processor, but it's not quite complete, or at least it could be better. And the nephew, Jonathan, was putting it together before he died, and it was made up of all different all different components from basically what you would think would be incompatible companies. And and then of course when he turns the device on, now this is back in early word processor days. This is a early version of a computer. I'm thinking almost like an early Apple, but all homemade and everything. So, and of course when Richard turns on the computer, the message that appears there is "Happy Birthday, Uncle Richard." So it really was meant to be a gift to him. So when Richard sets it up in his basement, or not basement, I'm sorry, basically a shed where he writes, he finds it has this amazing ability to affect reality. But every time he does this, the machine starts to break down, to heat up and overheat in the process. And so he starts to test this machine to figure out if it really is working as it seems to be. And as he's working on this, Richard's son comes home with let me see here. Seth comes back home. That's the son, with his obnoxious band members, basically. And the Richard can hear them talking from inside his shed, and the band members ask about him, and Seth basically, again, it's very disrespectful, talking about Richard behind his back. And so after having done some tests, including having the device make or teleport or something, give him basically a bag of gold coins, Richard does something that is sort of unthinkable in a way. He uses the device to retroactively erase Seth's existence. And because of this, of course, the band members are gone, because they never met him. And Seth's room is empty. And the basement that Seth used to use for a practice studio is not there anymore. Because again, this device works on the past somehow. And so Richard is worried at first when he figures out what the machine has actually done, and it's also again starting to appear like it won't last for long. But Richard is worried because he's worried about what his wife will say or think when she gets home. He thinks that she'll remember their son, and then there'll be problems because Richard has deleted Seth. But when she comes home, she's different. She's basically even worse than she was before. And it turns out that they never had any children. Again, because this machine works by going almost, I would say, affecting the past as well as the present, she never had a son. And so And of course, she's mean to him as well. And um, and so he goes back into his shed, and he ends up using the device to delete her as well. And and then he's trying to figure out what to do from there because he can tell the device is going to break down soon. And he's thinking about his brother and how his brother basically stole the woman that Richard, fell in love with at first. But, of course, because of his brother, Roger, being the bully, basically, Richard never had a chance. And so he uses the device one more time to rewrite reality, making what was his nephew, Jonathan, his own son, and what was his sister-in-law, I forget the name now, it doesn't really say, but basically, what was his sister-in-law is now his wife. And so that he basically rewrites reality, brings them back as his wife and son. And the son looks slightly different because, again, he came from Richard and his wife, his would have been, now is wife. And now, of course, Jonathan is Richard's son. And so everything works out for Richard in the end. But again, when you're looking at this story, let's see here. Okay. When you're looking at the story, the things have changed to where two people have been deleted. And that's a dangerous ability to have. And of course, after that, the machine starts to break down. Basically, finishes breaking down, but then Jonathan, who is now Richard's son, takes it and says he'll work on it. And Richard basically tells him there's no hurry because he's also aware of the temptation of using that device and feels like he shouldn't anymore because he's already used it enough. And that's basically where the story ends, but just the implications there of that story. It really is an amazing story because on the surface level, everything works out best or better for the author, for the main character. But then, if you think about it, if you think of that story as being a universe where people live, he basically killed two people by writing them out of existence. So it really is done well. Obviously, much better than I can describe here. And yeah, just an amazing concept that makes me think of magic and sort of what appear to be different abilities people have had over time to alter or rewrite reality, or stories where reality has changed all of a sudden, sort of those glitches in reality I talked about in a previous show. It makes me wonder if when these odd things happen, sort of like going back to this idea of the Mandela effect being maybe a side effect of those changes. Of course, obviously, when it comes to the more mundane examples of that, you can maybe try to write them off. But if you think about larger ones involving people either having died or not died, or world history events that seem to be different than they were before, and even then you can write that off in different ways as people in power rewriting history as well. But just considering the paranormal options there, makes you wonder about things that happen, and if there aren't some people out there who have figured out ways to do something similar to what the main character in this story has done. So, amazing story there, and I think that covers that one. So, let me move on to the next story here. We'll probably only get to one more today, I think. That first one was, like I said, really good. So I wanted to give that one some time to go over. The next one here is one of Stephen King's less frequent journeys into almost sci-fi horror instead of just plain paranormal or psychological horror. This is an example of him going into science fiction, which I really think is amazing. It's a neat story. So anyway, this one is called Beachworld. And it starts off with this craft that was was crash landed on a planet, and this takes place in the distant future, time unknown exactly. And let's see here. There are a few clues to the date, and but one of them is that the last of the Beach Boys, the musical group, had passed away 8,000 years before this. So this is a good ways in the future. So there is this the ship that is from a federation of some kind. Excuse me. That has crashed on an uncharted planet that appears to be made up entirely of sand. And it leaves one of the crew, Grimes, dead, and two surviving, and those are Rand and Shapiro. And Rand stares out over the sand dunes as he and Shapiro try to find a high point to get some idea of their environment. And so they find that this is just an endless land of sand. And Rand becomes hypnotized by all this and refuses to go anywhere else from there. And also refuses to drink water. So it's like he's basically starting to lose his mind. So Shapiro also feels drawn to the sand, to the dunes, but he doesn't like this hypnotic feeling he's getting. So he goes back to their ship, and to try to figure out what to do. And as he's there, he starts noticing, or thinks, imagine he's noticing that the let me see here. I'm sorry. So he starts wondering if the world had ever been home to civilizations or cities or bodies of water, and ultimately everything was taken by all the sand. So and even as he's trying to survive, get water where he can, figure out what equipment he has that works still, he's noticing sand slowly creeping into the ship. So, let's see here. And so, meanwhile, Rand is just going deeper and deeper into this hypnosis. Again, refuses water. Says he will fight Shapiro if Shapiro tries to give him any medicine to help him break out of that hypnosis or to keep him alive. So at this point, there is, and all this time, the sand dunes appear to be moving as well, a little at a time. So at one point, this trader spacecraft arrives in response to Shapiro's distress beacon. And at first this new crew don't believe Shapiro when he talks about the sand and how it's affecting Rand, and which is, I'm just noticing this now, Sand and Rand. But so Shapiro tells this crew that he needs help getting Rand to safety, and so this crew goes and tries to grab Rand and bring him back and bring him to the trader ship, and he fights back and destroys one of the robots that's part of this crew. And meanwhile, the sand is starting to move faster all around them. And the captain of the trading ship sends out another more advanced android to leave, but the this android quickly starts to break down as sand again starts to get into it more and more. And then there's also sand that rises up to stop a tranquilizer dart that one other member of the crew fires at Rand in order to knock him out so they can get him onto the ship. So the planet at this point is fighting back against efforts to help get anyone off of the planet. And meanwhile, the captain of the ship is getting messages from his crew on the ship saying, we have to get out of here now because the ship is slowly sinking into the sand. And let's see here. So they do get out, and but they have to leave Rand behind. But they barely get out, and this giant hand-shaped wave of sand tries to get them back, but they manage to escape. And Rand, who is left behind, stares up at the ship and then starts to basically, of course, because this is a horror story, starts to put handfuls of sand into his mouth. So he's basically going completely insane here. But then also you have to wonder, what is that? If that sand is somehow sentient, what is that going to do to him? So it's an amazing horror story, sci-fi story, and very well done. Again, as usual. There's only a few stories I've ever found from Stephen King that I didn't like. So I know I say that a lot of his stories are really good, but that's not exaggeration of any kind. So yeah, I think that's all we have time for today as far as the stories go. But these two I really liked in their own ways, because of the layers to them, and that's one of the things that Stephen King is able to do really well, is add layers to things. And so yeah, just amazing book. Definitely recommend checking it out. I have a few more stories left that I will cover next Wednesday, and to finish out that book. And then I'm also listening to another anthology called Just After Sunset, and I'll start reviewing that one as well. Selected stories from that one as well in the coming weeks. So thank you all for listening, and I will talk to you all on the next episode of Salcedo Paranormal. Take care.